Welcome to today's deep dive. I am really excited to discuss this collection of poetry that I've been kind of like living with for the past few weeks. It's called Death or You by Mohammad Sheikh Shahinur Rahman,
Oh, interesting.
published this year, actually, 2024.
Right.
And it explores some pretty, big themes, life, death, and love,
Right.
but in a way that I found really, really personally resonant and also very universal.
Yeah, I think that the thing that I find so fascinating about this particular collection is that the author really views these three themes, life, death, love, not as these separate things, but as these threads that are all woven together to make up, what it means to be human.
Yeah.
Like right in the introduction even, it's like they're setting us up for this idea that you can't really untangle any one of these experiences from the other.
It's like they're all connected, right?
Yeah.
And I think that connection really comes through in the very beginning with the personal reflection section.
Mm-hmm.
Like you get this sense of the author's own kind of experiences with life, death, and love that are really fueling a lot of the poems in this collection.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that makes it so impactful is that it doesn't feel like a theoretical exploration of these concepts. It feels very grounded in the author's own personal journey and their own experiences with these really big, monumental themes. And you see that reflected in the poems too. Like, for example, in the poems that are focused on life, there's such a range of emotion. There's joy, there's this kind of fear of loss, but there's also this underlying philosophy that it seems like the author is trying to get across, which is that, life is this process of discovery and growth.
Yeah, like in the poem Footprints in the Sand, each step we take, even if it gets, washed away by the tide, it leaves a mark. And I think that's such a beautiful metaphor for, even though experiences are fleeting, they shape us. They make us who we are. But then you have another poem, The Fragility of Life, and that one takes a little bit of a different approach. It compares life to a blooming rose.
Oh, wow.
So it's like beautiful, but also, really delicate.
Right.
And it really makes you kind of pause and think like, wow, everything's really temporary.
Yeah.
And there's this sense of carpe diem, like you really need to seize the day, make the most of every moment. Would you agree?
Definitely. I think that the author isn't shying away from, the ephemeral nature of life. And in fact, I think that they're encouraging us to be more aware of it, to really be present and mindful of the beauty that's around us, even amidst, the difficult things in life, because it's not going to last forever. And actually, that reminded me of a lot of like Eastern philosophical traditions that really emphasize, living fully in the present moment.
That's such a great connection. To see this in the poems, not just as a personal reflection, but as part of like a broader, almost like philosophical idea. But I want to kind of shift gears a little bit and talk about how the author tackles death, right? It's a topic that I think a lot of people, maybe shy away from or are a little bit afraid to really delve into. But here it's given equal weight in this collection.
Yeah. And I think that what's surprising is that it doesn't feel morbid or depressing. There's a real sense of honesty and kind of even acceptance, I think, in the way that the author presents death. Like in the poem Whispering Shadows, it talks about death as this constant presence, like it's lurking around the edges of our lives, which, can be a little bit unsettling, but it also really highlights, I think, death as a natural part of the cycle. It's not something to be feared, but just something that is
just like a normal part of life.
Yeah, exactly.
It's normalizing it in a way.
Right.
And the final exhale kind of takes this even further, right? It describes death as a release. It's almost like a peaceful kind of sigh at the end of a long journey.
It's really reframing it in a way that's, it's very powerful, I think.
Yeah. And, when we think about this in the context of the author's, main point about the interconnectedness of life, death, and love, it really kind of reinforces the idea that death isn't this absolute end.
Yeah.
It's a transition. It's part of this continuous flow. And it seems like what the author's trying to say is that understanding death can actually help us appreciate life more fully.
Totally, yeah. But, we've talked about life and death. So where does love fit into all of this? How does the author kind of like weave that third thread into this tapestry?
Yeah, that's where it gets really interesting, I think. Because love in this collection really serves the bridge between life and death. Like it transcends boundaries, it connects souls even after, physical separation. And there are poems like A Legacy of Love that really explore how love's impact continues even after somebody's gone. Their actions, their kindness, their words, all of those things live on in other people.
Right.
And it creates this kind of, immortality through love. It's like love is the thing that can actually defy death in a
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, absolutely.
It keeps part of someone alive,
Yeah.
even after they're not physically here. And then there's a poem, The Sound of Absence, which takes kind of a different approach to love, exploring the void that's left behind when somebody's gone.
Right.
And that one's so poignant, especially the lines where they talk about, like, the silence in a room that used to be filled with laughter.
Yeah, that one really stood out to me too. I think it speaks to the depth of love's impact, but also the enduring pain of loss. And again, it goes back to that central theme of interconnectedness, right? Life, death, and love are all woven together, and each one sort of defines and shapes the other.
Because, like, they can't exist without each other.
Yeah.
And so the author seems to be suggesting that we should embrace all of these experiences, the joy, the sorrow, the good, the bad, the messiness, because it all contributes to who we are and how we understand what it means to be human.
Yeah.
There's one poem in particular, Rena, that I'm curious to kind of get your take on. It's a dedication to a specific person. And it really celebrates that person's warmth and kindness and ability to inspire others. And it feels so personal.
Right.
It's like a glimpse into the author's relationships and how they've been shaped by love.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's what's so fascinating about including that poem in this collection is that it adds this layer of specificity to these, otherwise kind of universal themes. Like it's saying, here's a real life example of how these abstract concepts actually play out in my life. And in doing so, it invites us to think about how those same themes are playing out in our own lives.
Yeah, it's like Runa isn't just a personal dedication, but it's a reminder that these themes are actually lived experiences. They shape our relationships and our understanding of the world.
And it's interesting, too, how the author uses a lot of imagery and metaphors to really bring these complex themes to life. That they don't just feel like these abstract ideas. They really feel tangible and relatable. And one of the things I noticed was this recurring motif of nature throughout the collection. And I'm curious how you see that playing out.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I think that the author is drawing on the power of the natural world to really illuminate these deeper truths about life and death and love. And you see these images of like the sea and the stars and the wind, even gardens used to kind of represent these different facets of these experiences. Like, for instance, the breath of the sea, the waves constantly ebbing and flowing become this really powerful symbol, I think, of life's own rhythms, the ups and the downs, the way that things are constantly changing, but yet everything's still kind of connected.
Exactly. And the sea with its like vastness and depth really evokes this sense of the immensity of existence. It reminds us that we're part of something so much bigger than ourselves.
Right.
And so it's like the author is using these natural elements that we all have this relationship with, whether we realize it or not, to tap into that shared human experience. And then you have poems like Ashes to Stars, where the imagery takes on this really transformative quality.
Oh, yeah, that one really hit me hard. The ashes, representing loss and the end of things being transformed into stars, which symbolize hope and new beginnings.
Right.
It's such a beautiful way to illustrate that cycle of life and death. Even from endings, something new can emerge. And I feel like it's almost like a visual representation of that interconnectedness that the author keeps coming back to.
It is. And that transformation isn't limited to like the celestial imagery either. Like in Gardens of Grief, the author uses this metaphor of a garden to actually represent the grieving process itself, like the overgrown paths, the dark petals that reflect the pain and the sorrow of loss. But there's also this like hint of growth and renewal. It speaks to the resilience of the human spirit, you know, like our ability to heal and blossom even after we've experienced something really difficult.
It's like the author is acknowledging the darkness, but then reminding us that it's not the end of the story.
Right.
There's potential for beauty and growth even within those spaces. And by grounding these abstract concepts of grief and renewal in something tangible like a garden, it makes it so relatable. We've all seen a garden thrive even in harsh conditions, and it's like a source of hope. It's a reminder that even when things are tough, life finds a way.
And I think that's one of the things that this collection does so well is it takes these like really profound, often overwhelming themes and makes them feel accessible. By drawing on these universal experiences of nature, the author is creating a bridge between their own personal reflections and our own understanding of life and death and love.
Totally. I completely agree. And it's not just, telling us about these concepts, but it's inviting us to feel them, to experience them alongside the author, through these images. But I also noticed how the author uses contrasting imagery to kind of highlight the duality that's inherent in these themes.
Right.
For instance, The Last Sunset, juxtaposes the vibrant colors of the setting sun, which represents a life well lived with this encroaching darkness.
Yeah.
Acknowledging the inevitability of death.
And that's a great observation, and it's not presented as a negative or a frightening thing.
Right.
Instead, the darkness is embraced as part of the natural cycle, you know?
Yeah.
It's like the counterpart to the light. It reminds me of the yin and yang philosophy.
Yeah.
This idea that seemingly opposite forces are actually interconnected and interdependent, like you can't have one without the other.
Exactly. And that idea is reinforced in other poems too, like Cloak of Night and The Quiet Dawn. The darkness, which we usually associate with, fear and uncertainty, actually becomes like a source of comfort, a protective cloak.
Yeah.
And then the dawn, which symbolizes new beginnings, emerges from that darkness. So there's this continual cycle of death and rebirth.
It's a powerful message about the cyclical nature of existence, And it encourages us to move beyond this binary view of light and dark, good and bad, life and death.
Yeah.
And instead to see them as these complementary forces that really contribute to the richness and the complexity of human experience.
It's not about denying the darkness, but it's about understanding, the role it plays in the bigger picture.
Exactly.
And this conversation is really highlighting how all these seemingly disparate poems are actually threads that are all woven together. Each one kind of contributing to this larger message. It's not just random reflections. It feels very intentional, very carefully crafted.
It is. And the author's masterful use of imagery is really only one aspect of their craft. The language itself plays such a crucial role in shaping the reader's experience. Yeah. And what strikes me is the simplicity and the directness of the language. There's no need for flowery metaphors or obscure vocabulary.
All right.
It's everyday language that's just infused with this profound meaning.
It feels like the author's like having a conversation with us. Sharing their thoughts and feelings in a way that's so genuine and heartfelt. And there's this real sense of intimacy and vulnerability in the language that allows us as readers to connect with the poems on a really personal level.
It's not about showing off poetic prowess. It's about creating a space for reflection and emotional resonance. And it reminds us that poetry doesn't have to be complicated or inaccessible to be powerful.
Definitely.
Sometimes the simplest words spoken from the heart can have the greatest impact.
Absolutely. It's like the author is whispering these truths to us.
Yeah.
Inviting us to really lean in and listen and to let the words and wash over us and resonate with our own experiences as just this beautiful reminder of poetry's power to connect us to ourselves and to each other. And to remind us that we're not alone in trying to figure out these big questions of life and death and love.
It's so interesting, isn't it, how this collection can be so deeply personal and yet speak to something so universal at the same time.
We were talking about that simplicity of the language before, and I do think that plays a big role. But I feel like there's something more to it than that.
Yeah, it is a delicate balance. I mean, how do you maintain that authenticity of voice while still, speaking to something that's bigger than just one person's experience? And I think one of the keys here is that the author isn't afraid to be vulnerable.
Right.
They're open about their grief, their joy, their uncertainties. And it's that willingness to be real with us, to let us see them grappling with these questions that I think makes space for us as readers to do the same thing.
It's like they're giving us permission to feel those things too.
Yeah.
To acknowledge all the messy, complicated parts of being human without judgment.
Yeah, and it's not done in a way that feels preachy or sentimental, It's just raw and honest, and I think that's what makes it so powerful.
Yeah, it's like, hey, I'm figuring this out too. Come along with me.
Exactly, and that rawness is amplified, I think, by that directness of the language. There's no need to hide behind complicated metaphors or obscure vocabulary. It's just the simple truth of the words that really, hits you in the gut.
It bypasses those intellectual barriers, right? And it goes right for the heart. It's a good reminder that poetry doesn't have to be complicated to be profound.
And in terms of achieving that sense of universality, I think that the nature imagery plays a key role.
Yeah.
The sea, the stars, the wind, the earth, these are images that go beyond, any one culture.
Right.
They evoke a sense of awe and wonder that I think is common to all of us as humans.
We all look up at the same sky, right? Feel the
Yeah.
same breeze. We're all standing in the same ground. It's a reminder that we're all part of this bigger thing,
Mm-hmm.
connected to nature in ways that maybe we don't even always realize.
And by grounding those themes in those universal images, the author's tapping into, this shared well of emotions and experiences. The joy of a sunrise, the peace of a quiet night, the grief of a loss. These are all things that I think we all understand on a deep level, no matter who we are or where we come from.
It's like the author's giving us a common language
Right.
through those images, a way to connect to these really big ideas, even if we haven't had the exact same experiences.
Right. It opens up the poems to so many different interpretations, and it
Yeah.
allows each reader to find their own personal meaning in them.
I was also thinking about how the author uses contrast to really show the duality of these themes. Like in Bridges to Eternity,
Oh, yeah.
that metaphor of bridges connecting moments, the past and the new.
Right.
It speaks to how life and death are so intertwined, how the past shapes the present, and how hope can bridge the gap between what is and what might be.
Mm-hmm. That's such a powerful image. And it really gets to the heart of what the author's trying to say about, embracing the whole spectrum of human experience. It's not about denying the darkness or clinging to the light, but understanding how those two things coexist and inform each other.
Exactly. And we see this echoed in other poems, too, like Moonlight's Touch, where the darkness of the night is actually shown as a source of comfort
Right.
and solace. So it challenges that, typical association we have of darkness with fear
Mm-hmm.
and negativity, and reminds us that there can be beauty and peace even in the absence of light.
It's all about shifting our perspective, isn't it? Recognizing that what we might typically see as opposites, like light and dark, life and death, joy and sorrow, those are actually all interconnected. They're all part of this one big whole.
Yeah.
And embracing that complexity, finding meaning in both the good and the bad, that's really what makes us human.
I love that. Don't be afraid to feel it all. The light, the dark, the joy, the sorrow. It's all part of the journey.
And it's a journey that we're all on together. And I think that's why this collection is so powerful, because it speaks to that shared humanity, our struggles, our triumphs, and it reminds us that we're not alone.
Well, this has been such a thought-provoking dive into Death or You. It's a collection that really stays with you, prompting you to think about your own life, your own experiences, and find meaning in those everyday moments.
As you go about your day-to-day, we encourage you to take these reflections with you.
Yeah.
Appreciate the small things. Acknowledge the darkness, but don't be afraid of it. And cherish those connections that you have.
Remember, poetry is a conversation. So don't just read the words, feel them. Let them resonate with your own experiences, discover what they mean to you. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.